Hello and welcome. His childhood included a life living alongside lions in the wild and shaped his drive and determination in adulthood as he travels the globe making sure that humans give wildlife a proper chance to survive. This week on One-on-One, meet the international animal protection activist, Will Travers. It was an unusual and exciting upbringing by any standards. Side by side with wildlife in Africa, as his well-known English actor parents filmed the classic movie Born Free in Kenya in the mid-1960s. Will Travers' mother, Virginia McKenna, and father, Bill Travers, starred as Joy and George Adamson, a real-life couple who raised Elsa, an orphaned lioness, before releasing her into the wild. Making the film so heavily influenced the actors that they not only developed a close friendship with the Adamsons, but also created the Born Free Foundation to protect threatened species. Of their 4 children, Will was the most captivated by the experience and motivated with a determination to make sure he would carry on the crucial work his parents had started. Will Travers now crosses the globe tirelessly, reminding people that we must do everything to keep wildlife in the wild. Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
It's very nice to be here.
Now, since the Born Free Foundation was launched in 1984, you've got quite a lot done. Has the work been made easier by the public being more aware of what's needed to be done?
Well, in one sense, yes, because people are more aware and the environmental issues have been right at the forefront of consciousness. But the problem is that there's so many more people in the world, the pressure that they put on human resources, and in our case, wild places and wild animals, is increasing all the time. So it's a sort of, as fast as you paint one end of the bridge, it needs painting at the other.
To what degree are people mostly focused on, if you like, the glamorous or popular animals, the lions, the elephants, the bears, and really forget there are other species that also need to be looked after?
Well, it's an issue. We should be thinking about, all species, all forms of life on Earth. The problem is that we can't, and so Born Free takes a particular view. It does focus on the exotic megavertebrates, the elephants, the lions, bears, tigers. But by protecting those species in their habitats, you actually do end up protecting all the other species that live there as well, which just wouldn't catch the limelight. If I went out into the public and said, this is a really important caterpillar, it's going to be very, very hard to bring in the resources to protect that species. If I say it's the Ethiopian wolf, the rarest canid on the planet, there's only 500 left in the world, there are none in captivity, it goes, it's gone. If you can help me protect that, by the way, we are protecting the Afro-Alpine habitat of Ethiopia, people do get it.
Of course, globalized media has made a big difference in improving awareness, but my generation and the ones before it, to a large degree, were not really aware of the risks to animals in attractions such as circuses or zoos. What should we know about those kind of places?
Well, taking zoos as an example, there's probably around 10 to 12,000 zoos worldwide. They contain millions of animals. So this isn't a small sideshow. This is a major part of the way that we exploit wildlife. And I look at it as a sort of cost-benefit analysis. I say, okay, with the best will in the world, are zoos really delivering for conservation and education and animals? And when I look at the figures and I look at the amount of money that zoos raise through the gate and everything else, billions and billions of dollars, and then see the tiny amounts of money that are actually put back into in situ conservation, protecting habitat, conserving animals in the wild, I have to say they're not winning on the conservation argument. And then if I look at the number of species that they claim to have bred in captivity and returned to the wild, again, hundreds, thousands of species in captivity and a handful, probably about a dozen, that have gone back to the wild and become self-regenerative. I don't think they're winning on that one either. And then when I go to a zoo or a big marine park and I see orca, killer whales, and I listen to the audience, and as they walk out they say something like, wow, aren't those fish amazing? If they haven't even got to first base that these are marine mammals and not fish, then I'm afraid they've lost the education argument as well.
There's also a big debate about the value of culling as a way to control populations. There are those who argue it's a valid method, and there are those who say it's just not on. Where do you stand in the middle of all that?
Well, I know what the culling argument is, and for me it's got to be the option of absolute last resort, because there are so many other ways that we can manage wild populations.
Where do you see progress being made? Where are people becoming more aware and are more involved?
Well, on a number of levels. certainly kids nowadays are so much more aware, and they also are much less unsure about where they stand. They actually look at a situation and they kind of get what's right and what's wrong. The UK, for example, has no dolphins in captivity, no dolphin area anymore. And we were told when we were involved in taking some of those last dolphins out of captivity here that there would be this public outcry, that the kids would be deprived. I have to tell you, I got so many cards from children just simply saying those dolphins should be free. It's very, very clear and black and white as far as they're concerned. So that's encouraging.
Well, let's look at the remarkable story of Born Free, very much a part of your life, of course. Now, I want to go to those early years where your mother and father, Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, award-winning actors, went off to Kenya, took you off with them as well. Tell me about those early years and what you remember.
Well, I guess it was totally formative as far as I was concerned. I was only 5 when we went off to Kenya and lived for a year while the film was being made. But I know it changed their lives fundamentally because, as you rightly say, they were just an acting husband and wife team up until that point. And someone came along with this idea to turn the book Born Free by Joy Adamson into a movie. And at the time they said, well, it's probably just going to be like almost a documentary. Well, it didn't. It turned out to be, Panavision and everything else, and hugely successful at the box office. It was a royal command performance here for Her Majesty the Queen in the UK, and it changed the way my mum and dad thought about animals. And I got, as a young child, bitten by the Africa bug, and I've been going backward and forward to Kenya and other parts of Africa ever since.
So there you were in the mid-60s, a 5-year-old put into this environment, which again would have been, I guess, very alien from your upbringing.
It was, but at the same time, I mean, obviously, having mum and dad there was the security blanket, But in an environment where we could go walking every day with the words ringing in our heads. Now, if you come across a lion, this is what you do. I mean, that's fairly extraordinary to start with. And we started to sort of go and do. Mum and dad made films in other places. We went to Scotland to make a film about otters in Scotland, and then my dad started making documentary films. He made a 90-minute special actually, which was shown in the States, telling the story of this little lion that came from Harrods Pet Department, the department store in London, via my parents' home in Surrey, in the south of England, and back to Africa, to George, and ultimately to freedom.
What were the strongest memories of that time for you? What are the things that you recall that stuck with you? And then I guess in the subsequent journeys?
I think the thing that struck me then was that I realised how unusual my parents were, because they were, top actor and actress. Mum worked with Yul Brynner and in a whole raft of war movies in the late 1950s, and my dad did Juliet Diablo with Sidney Poitier and all those kind of things. And so they could have gone in a completely different direction. They could have ended up in Hollywood. I could have been a Hollywood brat. I've just turned out to be a wildlife brat instead. But it was a remarkable journey, and the documentary film part of my father's career I became involved with. I actually helped make some of those documentaries. We were consultants to Oxford Scientific Films for a period of time. So it really was incredibly exciting, and I think that was the formative bedrock on which kind of everything I do now is based.
I was going to say, at what age did you actually get a sense this is where your life was going to go? Did you have any other ideas or ambitions in your early years?
Well, I did play a French cavalry lieutenant in a 3-part made-for-TV special for CBS or NBC in America about the life of Paul Gauguin, and realised very fast, as I think did all the crew, that this was not the right career move for me. So I stopped being an actor almost before I started, and then age 24, an elephant was destroyed at the London Zoo, an elephant that my parents had been in a film with in the 60s. And there was public outcry in the UK. She was the last African elephant at London Zoo. She was destroyed. And we'd had a lot of letters written to us saying, could she not go back to Africa? And then when she died, what are we going to do? And we literally, in 1984, one evening, set up what is now the Born Free Foundation. And so 24 to now, and I'm just the wrong side of 50, I've been doing it ever since.
Now, your mother had 4 children, including you. Did the others, your siblings, get the same kind of bug?
I know that they love wildlife and they love Africa and wild places, but no, my sister lives in Australia and my two brothers live in the UK. One of them's a model, one of them is a first assistant working on commercials, very successful, but not quite to the same degree. I think one of us in the family is enough, quite honestly.
Now, when that film, Born Free, was made, once it was released, and of course it changed your parents' lives, tell me about their relationship and how it developed with Joy and George Adamson. What was it that made them realise that they weren't going to go back to that kind of life that they expected, the sort of acting life?
Well, they didn't. They knew them both, but I think their closest association by a long way was with George. And in fact, the documentaries that my father made, George had a piece of the action. He had a share in those films, and that, I think, the finance from that sustained George through some very, very lean times indeed. I mean, going up to his camp in the northern part of Kenya, very remote and quite dangerous area. I mean, ultimately, he was murdered by bandits in that area. Living off camel meat and buying onions, and that was kind of it. George needed help to sustain both him and his long-term project, which was still returning lions to the wild, which he was doing right up until the time of his death. So I think it was an important evolution as far as my parents were concerned, and I was lucky enough to be part of that journey.
Your father, Bill, passed away in 1994. He was not only the husband to your mother, of course, but her best friend as well. How did she cope with that once he'd gone? Someone who'd been such an integral part of her life in such a remarkable project.
Well, I think I'm sure it's the same for all widows. It's extraordinarily tough, but I think one of the things that made it perhaps a little easier to bear was the fact that his lifetime mission for the last 10 years of his life, working for Born Free, as our mentor, as our consultant. He was on the road for 3 years, going from one zoo to another, filming the damaged behaviour displayed by animals in zoos. I think that because the mission carried on, in a sense, he carried on as well, and that made it a little easier for her.
We'll have more questions for you. We're going to take a short break here. More one-on-one with Will Travers when we return. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with animal protection campaigner Will Travers. Will, you've obviously been out there with animals, some of whom are potentially dangerous. I know, of course, you have a sense of what to do because of the upbringing you've had, but any really close calls?
Yes, absolutely. The one particular one that springs to mind is that I was with the Kenya Wildlife Service moving elephants from an area where they were under threat to an area of safety, and we had a big bull elephant down. He was inside the crate on his side, and there were 4 of us actually in the crate. For some reason, the rest of the team decided that it was a good idea to shut the doors. So we're now inside the crate with a prostrate bull elephant who's unconscious, measuring tusks and feet and all the sort of things that you have to do. And he started to come round, and this crate is tiny. I mean, there's a foot or two of distance on any angle, and there's a little tiny escape hatch. And 2 of the people I was very slim. They went through very easily, and then I went through, and I was okay. And then Patrick, who is now a senior person at the Kenya Wildlife Service, who's a little bit larger than all of us, he just got stuck coming through, and there's this bull elephant inside coming round, and Patrick's stuck in the hatch, and we managed to hoik him out. But it was pretty close, because if we hadn't been able to get out, we would all be dead, without a question.
Now, of course, what you saw with your parents and with Joy and George Adamson was quite remarkable. The way they were able to live with lions, it was in quite a remarkable way. What was it? I mean, what was your sense as you grew up with lions as well? What was your sense in how you could relate to them and how you could make sure you were relatively safe with them too?
Well, it's very important, that last point. That, you know, they are wild animals, and you are not 100% safe. And I'm afraid a lot of people misinterpret that relationship. And so, for example, in the States now, there's probably 10,000 lions and tigers held by private individuals who think it's cool or trendy or something. And then when people get killed, they wonder why. And the why is because it's a dangerous wild animal that weighs 350 pounds and it can kill you with one swipe of its paw. And, you know, it's a pretty straightforward message. What you see in Born Free, if that film comes around late at night one day, you know, take a look, is a love story built on trust. And in fact, they were 2.5 months living with, working with the animals, going for walks with the lions every day before they even turned the cameras over, before one frame was taken. Because if you didn't get that relationship based on trust and affection, you would always have a tension between the human actors and the animal actors, and you would never be able to turn your back on an animal that you didn't trust.
I saw some of the pictures your parents took, absolutely remarkable photos. I mean, it looks so relaxed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was, although there were moments of danger. My mum's leg was broken during filming by one of the lions. My dad was bitten through the shoulder by one of the lions. George was mauled several times. His assistant and now one of the leading conservationists, Tony Fitzjohn, he was nearly killed by lions. It's not risk-free by any means, but you minimize the risk as much as possible, and then you hope that there aren't people who are foolish enough to think that in their trailer home they can have a lion out the back.
Now, obviously more than a quarter of a century doing this animal protection work, what do you feel are the most visible successes you've had?
Well, one that we touched on was the fact that we have no dolphins in captivity in the UK. I think the other big success for us is the zoo directive. We surveyed over 1,000 zoos in Europe. We took all our information and our evidence to the European Commission and the European Parliament, and we laid it all out for them. And it took another 15 years, but at the end of that time we had a directive, which means that all zoos in Europe have to be licensed. They have to meet some kind of notional minimum standards, albeit not nearly good enough, but at least we have something which protects animals right across Europe.
Why aren't governments doing more?
Sadly, I think it's a low priority. Most zoos are private. Government doesn't take a great interest in the transaction of animals between one zoo and another. Zoos make claims about conservation and education that if you read it in a superficial kind of way, you might believe. And so it isn't a high priority. It's becoming a higher priority, I think, because as we continue to expose the fact that zoos aren't delivering on their promises of conservation and education, we have to look at what the alternative is. And I believe the alternative is to conserve species in their natural habitat, and that's Born Free's slogan, is in fact to keep wildlife in the wild.
And I read a horrific story about, and I know you commented on this too, the American woman who went shot an elephant at 12 yards with a crossbow because she wanted to be the first woman who proved, at least to prove that she could do it. How do you battle that kind of lack of education, lack of sensitivity at least?
I don't think there's any chance that we're going to sit down and have a chat and she's going to say, you know, I was totally wrong, I'm never going to do it again, I want to be an advocate for Born Free. But there's the middle ground, the massive middle ground, and what I would call the silent majority, who need to be aware of those issues and then to make their decision as to which side of the fence they're on. And thankfully, there are so many compassionate, bright, intelligent individuals out there who do understand the difference between right and wrong, the difference between conserving elephants and shooting an elephant with a crossbow and then allowing it to bleed to death, to choke on its own blood overnight. There are enough people moving to the cause in the right kind of way to, I think, build the momentum for change.
How much of an issue is it for you dealing with conflict zones? Because, of course, many of the areas that you would really like to get into, I presume, would be areas that you really can't because of the conflicts taking place, especially in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, well, it can be a huge problem. It can be an enormous problem. And I'll give you an example. The Kahuzi-Biega National Park in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a huge national park. It's the home to one of the 3 gorilla species, the eastern lowland gorilla. People talk about the mountain gorilla a lot, and we know there are quite a lot of western lowland. Eastern lowland gorilla, its population has tumbled, and part of the reason for that is in this huge national park the rangers can only access about 10% of the park. It's just simply too dangerous to go into the other parts of the park which are occupied by militia. They could get killed, and in fact they have been killed. Rangers have been killed in significant numbers in the past.
Over the years, I mean, of course your parents were a huge influence on you, but who have been your mentors?
Well, they have, and George, who I knew reasonably well. I mean, I'll tell you a very short but funny story about George. He came over to the UK to write his last book with my dad. They did it on a tape recorder, and he'd never seen a colour television before. So he came and he arrived at the house, and my dad turned on the TV just to show him colour TV and said, "Do you want a whiskey?" And George said yes. It was about 5 o'clock. Turned on the TV, and the image that came up was Matt Monro and a singer called Des O'Connor singing Born Free.
That's right, which is
now,
the Academy Award-winning song. Yeah.
How spooky and freaky is that? George was a mentor, and I think people like David Attenborough have had a huge influence on my life and the life of many, many other people as well. But Cynthia Moss, Joyce Poole, people who've looked after elephants, lion specialists, tiger specialists, you know, they're all people I hold in high regard.
When you put out a message, if you were able to put out a message to people about something they could do now, make a difference in some way, what would that be?
Well, there's all the obvious things that they can do in their daily lives to sort of reduce their footprint, reduce their impact on the natural world in terms of consumption. But I suppose going back to our roots and the fact that it was the death of an elephant in London Zoo that really sparked what is today the Born Free Foundation, I would ask people to think twice before they interface with a captive animal situation. Go to the circus with animals? Maybe not. Go to the zoo? Maybe not. Keep an exotic animal as a pet? I don't think so. And if you go on holiday and you're offered some kind of excursion which involves live animals, maybe do something else that actually is of real cultural benefit and is a great experience for you as well. So let's keep wildlife in the wild and let's not exploit it in captivity.
Has there been a personal price for you to pay, you know, for being so dedicated to this cause?
No, I don't think that there has been a personal price. I have had the support of a fantastic family. I've got 2 wonderful kids. I have my ex-wife is a fantastic person. I have sort of no regrets in that respect, and I hope that they feel that that it's been worth it. It's been a great journey so far, and we're still travelling.
In terms of specific projects that have been waiting out there for you to tackle, you just haven't had a chance to. What's out there that you really want to you would like to get your teeth into?
Well, I'd like to kind of draw to closure the international ivory trade. I've been working on the international ivory trade since 1989. And I was just in Doha recently when 2 countries petitioned the international community to restart the trade effectively, massively, with over 100 tons of ivory that they wanted to sell. I would like to get to the point where we don't have an ivory trade and we don't excuse the ivory trade by saying, well, it could generate funds for conservation. I think there are many ways that elephants contribute to the world, both through ecotourism and responsible travel, but also because they are the gardeners of Africa. They are the gardeners of the natural habitat. In fact, there are seeds that won't germinate unless they've been passed through the gut of an elephant. So they have an incredibly important ecological role to play.
Well, of course, you've been very much a part of the Born Free legacy, but how would you like people to remember you?
Well, if they remember it all, I guess as someone who was a player, tried to do something, and we may not succeed on everything, and I certainly won't succeed on all the things that I want to do, but I'd like to think that people would say, well, didn't sit on his hands and do nothing, decided to try and make a difference, and, you know, judge me on results.
Will, thank you very much. Good luck with all your work.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.